9 experienced hikers walked into a Russian mountain range in 1959. None of them came out alive. When rescuers found the campsite, 6 weeks later, the tent had been cut open from the inside. Not the outside. The hikers had fled into minus 30-degree temperatures in their socks in the middle of the night with no shoes, no coats. 2 of them had chest injuries so severe, the coroner said the force required was equivalent to a car crash. 1 woman was missing her tongue. The Soviet government classified the investigation, and for 60 years the official explanation was unknown. That's not an answer. That's a cover. The Dyatlov Pass incident is the most analyzed unsolved mystery in modern history. There are entire research, hundreds of peer-reviewed papers, a formal Russian government reinvestigation that concluded in 2020. Here's the problem. The more data that surfaces, the stranger the case gets. The 9 hikers were not amateurs. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was a 23-year-old engineering student completed who had multiple winter expeditions across the Urals. These were experienced, competent people doing a route they'd trained for. They set up camp on the slope of Kolat-Syakhl, a Mansi word that translates, depending on the source, as either dead mountain or mountain of the dead. That night something happened. We don't know what. But we know enough to tell you that every simple explanation falls apart under pressure. The tent was found in a specific state that researchers still argue about. It had been cut from the inside, multiple slashes made by someone trying to get out. Fast, not one person, multiple people cutting simultaneously. The hikers' belongings were still inside: food, boots, warm gear. Their cameras were still there with film. That was later developed. The final photos show nothing unusual: camp setup, the group laughing, routine stuff. The footprints in the snow led in an orderly line, not a panicked scatter about. 500 meters downhill toward the tree line, orderly, like a group moving together in the dark. At the tree line, rescuers found evidence of a fire, broken branches on a large cedar tree, up to 5 meters high, meaning someone had climbed it, probably to look for something. 2 bodies were found near the fire. Their hands were burned. They appeared to have died of hypothermia. 3 more bodies were found between the cedar and the tent, in postures suggesting they were trying to return. The last 4 were found in May, when the snow melted, hidden under 4 meters of snowpack in a ravine nearby. These 4 are where the case gets medically impossible to explain. 2 of the ravine victims had severe rib fractures, not surface injuries, deep, internal. The coroner's report used the phrase massive. A 3rd had a fractured skull. The woman, Ludmila Dubinina, was missing her tongue, her eyes, and part of her lips. Her injuries were attributed to decomposition in the original report, but she'd been under snow for 2 months. In freezing temperatures. Decomposition at that rate, with those specific soft tissue losses, is not consistent with normal postmortem decay. That detail has never been cleanly resolved. Let's run through the serious ones. Avalanche, the 2020 Russian government reinvestigation landed on this. The slope angle, recent snowfall, setting up camp conditions that could trigger a slab avalanche. Here's the problem. The tent was not buried. The footprints were not buried. If a significant avalanche hit, it would have covered both. Experienced investigators on site in 1959 noted
Around
no
the tent,
fresh avalanche debris. The 2021 Swiss avalanche simulation studies supported the government's conclusion by modeling a small, delayed
it's scientifically
slab release. Defensible, but it still doesn't explain the internal injuries, the missing tongue, or why the group split the way they did. Infrasound. Certain mountain wind conditions can generate infrasound, sub-20 Hz frequencies that humans can't hear, but documented at this frequency range include disorientation, panic, a feeling of extreme dread. If infrasound hit the camp that night, it could explain the sudden, apparently irrational flight. But infrasound doesn't fracture ribs. Katabatic wind event. A sudden, violent downslope wind, the kind that can pin you against a surface with car crash force. Some researchers have proposed the ravine victims were thrown or compressed by an extreme wind event before the snow covered them. This is physically plausible. It's also secret weapons test. The Soviet military was conducting experiments in the Ural region during this period. Several witnesses reported strange lights in the sky over Kolat-Syakul in the weeks around the incident. The Soviet government's immediate classification of the case is consistent with wanting to conceal a failed test. Some of the clothing tested mildly radioactive. The government said this was contamination from a prior trip. They offered no documentation. What kind of event leaves one person with a missing tongue, another with a crushed chest, and a third with no visible injuries at all in the same location on the same night? There is one forensic finding that gets quietly mentioned in academic papers and then just as quietly dropped. The color of the hiker's skin when their bodies were found. Multiple witnesses, including the lead investigator, described an unusual deep orange or tan discoloration. The skin. This is not a normal postmortem color. The officially accepted explanations involve decomposition and UV exposure from the open snowfield. But two of the bodies found, earliest within weeks, also showed this discoloration. There is a documented medical condition that produces this effect on living tissue under specific types of radiation or chemical exposure. The Soviet government never tested the bodies for that, or if they did, those results were never released. Here's what we actually know. Stripped of speculation, 9 competent hikers panicked in the middle of the night hard enough to cut their way out of a tent they'd set up themselves. They moved downhill in an organized fashion, which means they were functional, not delirious at that moment. Something then happened that produced fatal internal injuries in multiple people, removed soft tissue from at least one body in a pattern inconsistent with standard decomposition, and left others completely uninjured. And the Soviet government looked at all of this, classified the results, wrote a known compelling force in the official report, and closed the case. The 2020 reinvestigation was the first official acknowledgement in 60 years. It chose avalanche. It was met with significant pushback from researchers who had spent years with the primary documents. Still open. Not officially, but in every sense, because no single explanation accounts for all the evidence. And every researcher who gets close enough to the full file eventually says the same thing. This is not what it looks like. We just can't agree on what it actually is. In 1959, a Soviet investigator wrote in his notes, the cause of their deaths was an unknown natural force which the hikers were unable to overcome. He filed the report, he retired. He never publicly discussed the case again. His name was Lev Ivanov. In 1990, 31 years later, after the Soviet Union had begun to collapse, he gave one interview. He said the lights in the sky were real. He said he was ordered not to investigate them. He said he believed to the end that the group had encountered something they were not meant to encounter.